Today is a day that we at the Riley Institute have anticipated for many months. The official welcoming into the world of A People's Movement, a playbook, a book that has been in the works for 2 years now. We had hoped to host this event last year, but as often happens with book projects, it took a little bit longer than we anticipated. But now that we are here, we believe that it was worth the wait. And we just appreciate all of you for coming here and spending your afternoons and hopefully your evenings with us. We're excited to share this book, its history, its content, and its relevancy today with all of you. Over the past 2 years, I've had the great pleasure and occasional moments of stress of managing this project. I've learned about oral history interviews, transcription services, design elements, embossing, types of paper, and more than I ever needed to know about the proper usage of hyphens. On a personal note, I have enjoyed this edification so much. I'm not sure there's ever been a work experience I've enjoyed more, and that's because of the people, because of all of you and the opportunity to get to meet you and speak with you and learn about South Carolina in the 1980s. I really felt many days during this project like I could see Columbia and the rest of the state in my mind's eye. So please bear with me through some very important thank yous, as books do not come to life without a team, and a great team effort this has been. Thanks first to our fundraisers for the project, Sandy Rink, Special Advisor to Secretary Riley and his teammate in Washington, Benny Walker, Senior Associate with the Riley Institute, and Dr. Susan Shai, Furman's former First Lady and always a leading community voice in support of public education. To our donors, and that's many of you, this would never have happened without you. We honor and we recognize you for believing in this book and bringing it to life. To our National Advisory Council for the book, Matt Williams, Jeff Livingston, John Simpkins, Susan Shai, Terry Dozier, Ron Fairchild, Don Gordon, Terry Peterson, and Bob Saffold for serving as our guides throughout this project, shaping the vision, and providing critical feedback at important junctures along the way. To our wonderful Furman intern, now graduate, Ebony Johnson, for being an integral part of this project and teaching us so much along the way. To our meticulous editors, our unflappable designer, Kara Robb, and our patient printer, Index, we appreciate all of your contributions and kindness and expertise. Thank you to Dorothy Walker, Director of the Political Collection Library at the University of South Carolina, for researching and providing so much historical information from the Riley papers that are housed there. Dorothy also provided these cowboy boots that are part of the Riley collection, and you're going to learn a little bit more about those in a minute, if you don't already know. A great thank you to our 27 interviewees. Thank you for saying yes. Without you, this storyline and this playbook would really not have come to exist. So thank you for what you did in the 1980s and then for sharing those stories with us over the past 2 years. And goodness, where to start with our author, Bob Saffold? Thanks is truly not sufficient. There was really no other person who could write the book in this way. Not only is Bob a public education expert, a great writer, a tremendous human being, and a part-time perfectionist, he also attended public schools in Barnwell County, South Carolina. During the time of the EIA passage, he was a teacher at Britton's Neck High School in Marion District 4, where his father was serving as the superintendent. He even attended the EIA Regional Forum in Florence in the fall of 1983. When the EIA was passed by the General Assembly in June of 1984, his father asked him to step in and help him interpret the law, given its comprehensive scope and magnitude, and work with him to build out policies and programs established by the EIA. So truly, when it comes to the perfect author, Bob was the unicorn we needed. A deep personal, heartfelt thanks to my partner in crime, Jackie Martin, who has been with me on every decision, every edit, every design element. She's truly the co-project manager for the book, and we've had a lot of fun also. With the greatest of affection, I thank the Riley Institute's Chief Inspiration Officer, Dick Riley, for his vision for the Education Improvement Act. For his vision, and then for seeing it through. We're so happy to be able to tell this story now and learn from it as we work to shape good education policy today. And also, we love you. Coming up, we'll have a panel discussion with some of the people who were involved in the passage and implementation of the Education Improvement Act. But before that, we'll hear some very important framing remarks from the one and only Terry Peterson, for whom I have saved my final thanks. Terry has been Dick Riley's Chief Education Advisor for almost 45 years. All 8 years when he was a governor, all 8 years when he was the secretary, and all of the years before and since and in between. Dick has referred to Terry as his education soulmate, and anyone who has worked with the two of them knows that this is absolutely true. He's a senior fellow here at the Riley Institute, the godfather of after school for the whole country, and a man with many titles. Terry had the idea for this book, and he shared it with us, and he kept sharing it, and he inspired us. He kept telling us that he would run into people who he had worked with on the EIA 30 years later, and they would say, that was the most important professional experience of my life. Even though I've done this and this and this, I never forget being part of that movement with the Education Improvement Act. And he sold us on the idea, and that's the reason this book has come into existence. So I'll just say, Terry, there are not enough words in the world to thank you for all you've done, for helping us to create the vision and shepherd us through every email and every step along the way, for continuing even now to work day in and day out for young people, and for pushing all of us to be better versions of ourselves. So I welcome you to the stage.
It is really good to be with all of you. And there's so many people who are involved with Dick and I, and way beyond my involvement with Dick before he became governor and since. And it's so great to see all of you here. It's like a, I don't know, what is it, like a step family, all coming together that loves each other. So thank you. And thank you, Kat, for that wonderful introduction. I want to thank her, too, for all her work with Bob Saffold, the whole Riley Institute team, and Furman for developing this book and putting on this event. She also heads up a terrific after-school and summer leadership program, the White Riley Peterson Fellows Program, that prepares leaders from across America to lead their states in having better and more after-school and summer opportunities. So a person of many talents. Thank you, Kat. A wonderful South Carolinian, Dr. Benjamin Mays, a sharecropper's son who overcame many obstacles to become a national leader in education, wrote, "The tragedy of life doesn't lie in not reaching your goal. The tragedy lies in having no goal to reach. It isn't a calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it is a calamity not to dream." Some years later, key people at the grassroots and grass tops of South Carolina captured big dreams and set high goals in developing the Education Improvement Act, the EIA. Now, many years later, as Kat reported, they say it's been one of the most memorable experiences in their lives. Before the EIA, South Carolina's 49th and 50th rankings in education made many people very pessimistic about passing and funding really anything major in education. In fact, long-term political observers called the early legislative supporters dismissively the Smurfs. The grassroots EIA educators, citizens, parents, and business people were labeled naive. Yet this band of grassroots and grasstop leaders, and many of you in this room today, proved those naysayers wrong by passing the EIA, totally intact, totally funded, totally phased in over 7 years, and then continuing for another 15 years or more. It is very important that this accomplishment is now documented by Bob Saffold, who will speak to you later. Critically, the lessons learned have been converted to a playbook of 25 strategies. Many of these plays can and should be used by today's local, state, and national leaders. Let me repeat that. Many of these plays and strategies can and should be used by today's local, state, and national leaders. Let's review what happened. This headline captures the big picture. They said it couldn't be done, but Riley worked a miracle. A huge banner in the state newspaper, the largest paper in the state. In persuading the General Assembly to pass the Education Improvement Act, along with a penny sales tax to fund it, Riley made his impossible dream come true. This miracle happened, I hope you don't think happened by accident. Here's the story. This miracle happened because thousands of teachers, educators, parents, and community and business leaders were personally involved in various ways in developing, passing, funding, and implementing the EIA. They recommended actions to be included in the EIA through regional forums and community settings. A number of you here helped make that happen or attended them. Thank you. They staffed phone banks. Part of it we won't quite ever go into. During the day, the phone banks took in information. At night, they called into legislative districts that needed a little arm twisting. That part I didn't tell you. Education days were organized in schools and communities across the state. Daily, hundreds of people showed up in the balconies and hallways of the State House, telling the reluctant legislators to invest a penny for their thoughts. The favorite place in State House then for male reluctant legislators would be what? The men's bathroom. There were so many women, teachers, moms, community leaders, that's the only way they could get away from them. And then some of you in this room would patiently sit out by the door of the men's restroom, and as soon as they came out, would pair up the mom, the teacher, the principal, superintendent with a legislator. That was exciting. Many of the initiatives in the EIA were cutting edge then and are very relevant today. They offered something new, challenging, and positive for students and educators and families at all levels of education. This is just a summary of the list. It's really, looking back, it's almost amazing. It contains everything people would like to do in education in one package. From early education programs for 4-year-olds, chemistry, second language, advanced placement courses made easily available. Family education community partnerships were fostered across the state, including 12,000 schools that had school improvement councils. Teachers and principals were paid significantly more for working harder and longer. A lot of states raise standards. That's tough enough to do. But what if you're struggling? High standards and you're struggling. That's just more frustrating. What the EIA did is provided extra help in school, after school, and summer, so kids could meet the higher standards. Students were stretched to reach their maximum potential by expanding the arts in the basic curriculum and offering more academic and artistically gifted programs. Better career and occupational programs with modern equipment were provided, and more and more. Well, that's a lot of opportunity, right? In 1,200 schools. Guess what? Whoops. It affected the screen. There were so many opportunities. Let's see. This is why, the price tag. Back then, 84, that set of opportunities cost about $250 million. And the only way to realistically generate this amount of funding was to pass a 1-cent sales tax dedicated to the EIA. And by the way, it is still generating hundreds of millions of dollars for education today. Actually, this year, over $1 billion. The stable investment in these innovative programs, combined with the people's movement, really paid off. A couple of headlines describe the EIA successes. After 3 years, Chicago Tribune, once near the bottom, South Carolina schools ranked first in improvement. 4 years, Wall Street Journal, South Carolina scores high marks as states act to improve their educational standards. 5 years, in a quantum leap, South Carolina schools. 6 years, one of the broadest and most far-reaching school reform efforts the nation has seen. There's a lot of data to back this up as well. This chart on the left side is 7 years before the EIA, the right 7 years after. As you can see, the high school enrollments in college and career courses were flat for the 7 years before. 7 years after the EIA, enrollment, like in chemistry, AP courses, doubled. Before, almost no gains in SAT scores. After, SAT scores increased by a spectacular 36 points, leading the nation. African American students increased 69 points. Before, very little recognition of our work in education. After, this is just a small sample. Early education program plan was the best in the nation. Arts plan was the best in the nation. And we had the first ever teacher recruitment center. Let me give you a few other hard numbers. The number of students attending college increased dramatically, as well as success in college. An additional 125,000 students met basic skill standards. The EIA was rated by a national study by our teachers, as a top education reform among the states. Guess what happens when you involve teachers on the front end? And it includes what they want done. This is what happens on the back end, and you get tremendous results. After these initial 7 years, the academic gains continued because of leadership. A lot of folks in here, including former state superintendents. The progress continued on the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Just to remind you, these results were a long way from 40th and 50th rankings in the 60s and 70s before the EIA. Now, again, that's a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving people. So it takes a tenacious leader. It takes a leader who believed in the better angels in all of us, who had the audacity to say, hey, we can bring 13,000 people together in 7 forums, and they'll get along, and we'll come without something great. Now just think about that. Well, I know he's going to speak later, but I have to introduce him now. The best education governor, the best U.S. Secretary of Education, and our good friend, Richard W. Riley. So let me begin concluding. I want to remind you back then, and some of you might remember this, there were 2 sayings. Poor old South Carolina can't get off the bottom. And thank God for Mississippi. Yet you just saw the evidence of the South Carolina EIA miracle. This book and its strategic plays describe the EIA battle as one for the soul and the future of South Carolina. And for many years, we won many of those battles. It would be terrific if we would fight and win such education battles again in many states. Today, we have a new pressing reason to be engaged in comprehensive, bold education improvement. During COVID, many students lost ground educationally. Some even became disengaged from learning. The critical steps of achieving broad positive change are as relevant today as they were with the EIA. Remember, it isn't a calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it is a calamity not to dream. Now we have, the country has the key 25 strategic plays to make something big and bold happen for all the children of all the people across America. Let's use them. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is really a team effort, and we have a lot of the team here from all over the years, and it's so great. But we're now going to hear from a panel of 4 people who had different views of all this from the trenches. They saw the good, the struggles. I don't think they saw any evils, but we might hear about that. With the EIA adventures. An interesting mix at the time. They represent a student at the time, the governor's chief political strategist, a House member, one of the Smurfs. You will get to meet one of the Smurfs. A teacher recognizing the benefits and challenges with the EIA, and a person in charge of the EIA oversight. So as I get ready to have them come to the stage, but not quite yet, I want to mention their names. John Simpkins, along with who will be our moderator, along with our discussants, Dwight Drake, Ginger Crocker, and Terry Dozier. Let me introduce John, our moderator, and then I think he's going to have us introduce ourselves. John was actually a direct beneficiary of the EIA. He was a high school student. And he went on way beyond that. Harvard College and Duke University School of Law. He is the new president of the very important nonprofit MDC. He has extensive experience at the local, state, national, and international levels addressing economic, education, mobility, and health issues. As they come to the stage, please give them a round of applause and welcome. Please join me.
Good afternoon, everybody. I like this room because it's probably the last time, and Jeff Livingston is right over there, my Harvard classmate and fellow Midlands native. This will probably be the last time that I can say that we speak on behalf of the kids. Because we were kids. We were just entering high school. And as a result of the EIA, advanced placement courses were available to us. I was a teacher cadet, which was part of that teacher recruitment center. Jeff and I went to the Governor's School of South Carolina at the College of Charleston. And it was there, among other places, where we learned how to dream, but also understand that we could realize those dreams. Jeff and I were lucky. But I would argue that there are 100,000 Jeffs and me in this state right now. So today we're going to talk about what we did 40 years ago and what that means for today. And I couldn't pick a better group. It's like if you're a basketball coach and you just roll the ball out on the court and just let them play. We got 4 and we don't need 5 with these 4. And they're going to share with us not only what they believe the opportunities are now, but also what led us to this point. So as Terry said, I'm going to let them introduce themselves by first telling you what they do now, and then telling you where they were in 1983, 40 years ago, that is relevant to this conversation as we were thinking about changing the education landscape in South Carolina. And so, Terry Dozier, we're going to start with you.
Okay, I'm Terry Dozier. recently retired as the director of the Center for Teacher Leadership at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Our biggest project was the Richmond Teacher Residency Program that recruited, prepared, and supported teachers for our most challenged schools. And I'm very proud that we started with Richmond Public Schools. We're now really all over the state of Virginia. And I'm also very proud that we brought in the Teacher Cadet Program from South Carolina as part of our work. In 1983, I was teaching world history at Irmo High School in Lexington 5, and was hearing a lot about the activity around the EIA and the meetings that were being held for teachers to provide input, as well as, you know, the community leaders, business leaders. And I'll wait to share a story about one of the challenges with the EIA that I got directly involved with. But that's what I was doing, teaching.
Thank you.
I'm Dwight Drake, and now I'm a partner at the law firm of Nelson Mylands, Riley and Scarborough, along with Dick and David Wilkins, I see here, and maybe some others. I've been there really since about the time of the passage of the EIA in 1984, but in 1983 I was on Governor Riley's staff as his executive assistant for legislative and political affairs, a title that I made up for myself. And during that period of time, along with Terry and Bill Prince and Chip McKinney and Sally Hughley and a group of others that I've seen here today, we had the honor to work for Dick to help him get past the EIA, without which we could not have done it, but for somebody who actually voted for the EIA.
Thank you. I'm Ginger Crocker. I had the honor of representing Lawrence County in the legislature, and I was elected in 1978, right before the governor got there. I also had the honor of working as his page in the state senate. I'm currently working at the Public Service Commission. I tried to retire. I made it 2 months, just couldn't do it, so I went back to work. I'm the Community Relations Director for the Public Service Commission.
I'm Terry Peterson. You heard a lot, probably too much already. At the time, I was the education director for the governor's office, and also was sort of the staff director of the Blue Ribbon committees that put together the EIA. And then for 7 years, out of the governor's office, was in charge of that committee, making sure the EIA was implemented. I heard an interesting story last night from my daughter, who's sitting out here. So she was 9. And we had so many meetings. I don't know if Susan Madden is here. I think she said there were 250 meetings in the governor's mansion to build support for the EIA. And it takes a lot of time. And Dick was making this happen. And so I dragged my kids along, and I always worried about that. Until last night she told me, man, we got into the room. Susan brought us the best chocolate chip cookies. We watched TV. So that was another part of my life, and so I thought you'd talk about the AP courses, gifts, and no, it was the chocolate chip cookies in the governor's mansion.
Terry, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it means that it's always really important to figure out when's the best time to do something. Chocolate chip cookies might be a good incentive from time to time. And what I heard in your remarks was that this was a campaign. It was essentially another political campaign. And you don't launch a campaign unless you feel like it's the right time and you have some chance of actually being successful. So the first question I want to ask you and Dwight is, why then? What made the soil conditions right to take on something like this?
Well, two things, John. And I hate to give any credit to Ronald Reagan for anything, as being a yellow dog Democrat I am. But in truth and in fact, the stage was set on a national level by a committee that Reagan appointed, and they came out with their Nation at Risk report that got massive publicity and showed a lot of the public the real problems that public education faced everywhere. That was one thing. Another thing that I think set the soil right was The EIA, Dick, was actually built on a failure of yours. One of the things that Dick did, of course, that I was involved in was to get the Constitution amended so that governors could serve 2 terms. He was elected to his 2nd term, and in that first year of his term, he proposed a piece of legislation to increase the sales tax by 1 cent, with 1/3 of it going to education, 1/3 of it going to local governments, and 1/3 of it going to tax refunds. And it failed, and it's a damn good thing it did. But out of that failure, John, the EIA began to grow as a possibility. And one meeting I remember particularly, we realized that that bill that I just described was going down the tubes, but our opponents, which were led largely by the business community at that time, didn't know we had lost. We knew we had lost. And they came and asked me to convene a meeting with the governor, and they wanted him to give up, and he's never done that, so he didn't do that then. But one of them said, and I'll tell you who it was George Dean Johnson. He said, Governor, he said, if this whole penny was going to education, I'd support it. By God, we made him live up to that. But out of that, the governor realized that the better thing to do was to focus exclusively on education. And so the third thing that I'd say is that without him devoting his entire energies almost exclusively to that legislation, it could not have happened. So those were the 3 conditions of the soil. And by the way, I'm told, Bill, it's in the book, that Bill Prince, who had a great deal to do with the success of the EIA, he and I wrote a memo to the governor outlining not the substance and the policy of the EIA, but a political strategy for the passage of it. And the big part of that was telling him that he had to devote all of his energy to that issue. I almost got to eat those words, though, John, because, as I said, I left Riley's office and went to the law firm, and I had a big client. And we were trying to get something passed on banking, and we decided we needed to go get the governor's help, and we went in, I arranged the meeting. He's fighting for the EIA, and he heard us out on this banking bill, and he said, well, Bob, talking to Bob Royal, he said, well, Bob, I'd love to help you, but I can't do anything but the EIA. And all I could think of was, for God's sakes, don't look at me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, building on that, as I mentioned, a lot of events at the governor's mansion, and twisting arms in a nice way. A group came in, farmers, railroads, whatever, and they, welcome, and then he'd say, well, I'd love to help you, but we first have to pass the Education Improvement Act. So we had all kind of interest groups involved, and part, I think, of the reason, which feeds into the current COVID crisis that was underneath all this, is in 80, 81, 82, there was a really bad recession. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time people saw, particularly in the South, that textile mills, tobacco, cotton, jobs that required muscle power were evaporating fast. And the only way the South could compete if you start developing brain power. But in addition to that, all our neighbors states had interesting governors who were interested in education.
Right.
So in addition to Reagan's effort, all our neighboring states, they were putting together commissions and work to improve education. So we were already at that whopping 49th or 50th. So what position can you be if everybody else improves and we don't?
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. So from Terry Peterson's observations about where the states were at the macro level, Terry Dozier, you had been in the classroom. And by the time the EIA was being implemented, you had been named National Teacher of the Year. So you were doing your victory lap around the country. And then ultimately went to teach in an international school in Singapore.
Right. Singapore.
But before all of that, as you said, you were teaching world history at IRMO. What did you see as a teacher at the time that made you think that things needed to change?
Okay. Well, if you know about IRMO High School, we served a community that was primarily upper middle class, and we always did well in testing. But good test scores often mask problems with, different subgroups or individuals, and that was certainly true at RMO. And it was clear to me that expectations for students in different academic tracks were dramatically different. They varied dramatically. And I found this was even true in communities across the state, because when I would get a student from a rural community into my class, and they'd been making straight A's in their other school, and they were struggling, and I mean struggling, to make a C with me, I realized that many of these students had never really been challenged. And in some cases, didn't have even coursework that was going to enable them to reach their full potential. And so, they always rose to the occasion. It took some time, but it was clear to me that we had to make sure that all kids had the right opportunities. And one of the running jokes among teachers was that gifted and talented students were simply the students with the pushiest parents. And not all students have that kind of advocacy. And that's really what the EIA was about. It was about advocating for all students, and that not just the top third deserved a first-class education, but all students. And I say Secretary Riley because I worked with him in Washington, but Governor Riley and then Secretary Riley used to always talk about the tyranny of low expectations, and in which poor minority students, students with disabilities, students that spoke a language other than English were often written off in our schools. And I certainly saw that. And especially when I had the opportunity as the South Carolina Teacher of the Year to travel around the state, and then nationally as the National Teacher of the Year, some students had access to really rich opportunities that included advanced placement courses, the arts, extracurricular activities, but many did not. And as a teacher, I recognize that raising standards, I had very high standards, but raising standards and expectations cannot be the job of the teacher alone, that you have to have the community involved and engaged in the effort. And I will tell you, and this is not only true, when the Nation at Risk report came out and every education reform that came after that, teachers often felt that it was about blaming and shaming teachers and students, that, everything that was part of the reform effort was to punish us, and that most reform efforts were done to teachers, not with teachers. And personally, that's always a recipe for failure, because unless teachers are involved in a meaningful way in addressing our educational challenges, very little will change, and the changes that are made will be misguided or short-lived. But clearly, as a teacher, and I started seeing this excitement in these meetings that were taking place, in which 2,000 teachers were participating, not just teacher representatives, but classroom teachers, that the EIA was different. We never felt that we were being blamed for South Carolina's poor ratings, and instead we were being asked, what do you need? What should we do to support you and your students? And so I believe that's why the EIA came out as such a comprehensive effort to reform education, because teachers were engaged from the very beginning. And it was clear that policymakers were listening to us when we started to see the things that were part of the EIA.
And so we've got teachers, policymakers, strategists all coming together around this, pulling in the business community, pulling in parents. Ginger, you were in the legislature at this point. You've been elected in 1978. So by 1983, you realize that every time somebody comes to you with something, they think it's the most important thing in the world.
Absolutely. And I understand that. The real success that we had with passing it out of the House was the work that the staff did in organizing the state and going out to the stakeholders and getting them to contact their legislators. Of course, the bill had to start in the House because it was a tax increase.
Right.
And the House at that time, we had the Crazy Caucus, which I was an honor to be a part of, the Fat and Uglies, and then some other people that weren't in either.
You're going to need to explain this.
Absolutely. And I did exactly what Dwight, Bill, and Terry told me to do. That was my job. But I broke from the Crazy Caucus. Harriet Kaiserling and I broke from the Crazy Caucus to be forefront of this act. And we eventually got them. I knew we would. But the House was divided when we started. It was 40, 40, 40. 44, 40 against, and 40 who we had to go get. And that was our job. Mm-hmm. And probably the most important thing we did, and y'all are going to laugh when I say this, we made sure that every vote we took, we had one of our team vote with the other side. So if we lost the vote, we could move to reconsider.
Yeah, yeah.
which is really how we were able to kind of pull it off in the end. But it was simply due to the grassroots efforts of teachers, governors, staff, and reaching out to the public and getting them involved in talking to their legislators. I know that's how we passed it.
Wow.
And then we were able to get the Crazy Caucus to vote right by the end.
What are these boots doing here?
Well,
I know,
you
but-
probably need a full story from the governor. But as I mentioned, that time period, Southern governors, a lot of them, including Republican and Democrat, were really making the push big for education. Mark Musick was head of the Southern Regional Education Board. He was fostering this dissension and competition like crazy. Mark White, the governor of Texas, heard about the Riley effort, and he was trying to do stuff, and so he really liked the governor, and he said, I got a great idea. I got these boots. And, you know, if you get those boots, you know what you can kick. No, I mean, you know what you can do with those boots for just reluctant legislators. And so Dick, at some event, put them on, and so we're sitting there, and he said, I am not going to take these off until we pass the EIA. If you look at them, they're really well worn. It took a long time to pass the EIA.
Yes, it did.
I think he really wore them to be taller.
In addition to that, you mentioned having to make it clear to everybody this was the priority, and so everything else had to get in line. Beyond that, what was the biggest obstacle you had to get over or get around in order to make this happen?
I think because of all the work that you've heard described here, and many of you here, most of you here, were involved in it, and much of that work was done in the fall, as you'll recall, before the legislature came here, and you begin to build up support in the community. So the biggest problem when the General Assembly convened in January was the entire leadership of the House of Representatives was opposed to it. The Speaker, the Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the Chairman of literally all of the committees. We found that we did get some as things moved on. But the bill, of course, had to go through the Ways and Means Committee. And Mr. Tom Mangum, who was the chairman, was more feared than respected, I'd say, but he had an iron hand on that committee, and almost everybody here that I recognize, I could say, but for what you did, the EIA wouldn't have passed. But there's one person that I remember so well in that committee who had the guts and the knowledge, because Terry and those had briefed him, to take on the chairman, Representative Crosby Lewis, who is here, and
Yes.
I can see him now, bulldog that he is. Taking on the chairman, and through his efforts and the efforts of all of you here, the bill got out of the committee by a single vote.
Right. And the South Carolina Manufacturers Association had opposed it. Springs Mills endorsed it.
Yep.
Clennon Mills endorsed it, but they were the only two. And so they had the textile manufacturers, they had business and industry fighting it. And that's a hard group to beat.
Yeah.
But we did.
It wasn't, and part of it was just the magnitude of it, but the sales tax increase was a huge factor. People say, oh, I love the high standards. Well, what about to help kids meet it? Oh, does that cost money? Oh, I love AP courses. That costs money, okay. Crosby and Ginger and a few others had made a clever decision. We were trying to pass it all one big package. When you only have a one vote margin to work, they took a different strategy and they said, let's take each piece at a time. So people would have to vote against teachers being paid the Southeastern average, vote against four-year-old programs. And it went on for a while, and all at once, some of the leaders came. I remember sitting there watching this in the Ways and Means Committee, and they said, you know what you're doing? You're adding up all these programs, and at the end of the day, it's going to be $250 million, and we're going to have to raise the sales tax.
Yeah.
By then, we had the one-vote majority.
And how did you whip the votes to get to that one vote majority? What was that process like?
Well, it involved, as Ginger was saying earlier, the phone banks, the one-on-one meetings, the efforts that the teachers, and I see Elizabeth Gressett out there, she was a big part of that to organize teachers all over. Legislator didn't have, as Terry said, didn't have a safe place to go but the men's room.
And I guarded that.
To get away, was that you? Okay. Sorry about that. But the teachers and ultimately a good part of the business community in Springs Industries was tremendous. And Clinton Mills from Lawrence. Clinton. Were big supporters, and they became engaged. And then secondly, as Terry was describing, the policies that were being projected, they made so much sense when legislators began to be knowledgeable on them. So then the last part was the one-on-one lobbying that I was and others were involved in. But more important than anything else was the one-on-one lobbying done by the governor. I could go talk to a legislator for a day and frankly say better things than he could. But he could talk to them for 5 minutes and he'd have their vote. No, he could make a compelling case because he understood all of it. And finally, because of the credibility that he had with members of the General Assembly. We haven't had a governor since then who had the credibility that he had with members of the General Assembly. There was more than one legislator told me, well, I'm not so sure that I understand all of this bill, and I'm not sure I support all of it, and I sure don't want to vote for a tax increase, but I know Dick's thought this thing out, and he believes in it, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah. Thank you. With the time we've got left, I want to be more forward-facing and talk about today and beyond. And Terry, I want to ask you the 2023 version of the 1983 question. What do you see now as you look back on your career and you think about the landscape of education now nationally? Where are the opportunities? What are the things that need to be addressed? Where do you think the priority should be in any reform effort or ongoing effort to improve education for our nation's kids?
Well, I think we still have some of the issues that I talked about where, depending on the subgroups, they're not getting what they need. But I think Terry mentioned the tremendous learning loss that we've had in the past couple of years because of COVID. And of course, you know, the students who have suffered the most and had the greatest learning loss are our students in, you know, largely, you know, low socioeconomic communities, minority students, and so, you know, a continued focus in that. And I'm just to talk about kind of some negative things that we've got to fight against. You know, we see, certainly in my state right now of Virginia, but across the country, Florida's another example, where for political reasons, leaders, governors, are using education as a tool to divide people. over what's being taught in schools. And, teachers are being told what they can teach, when they can teach, how they can teach. And so I think those are the things that we need, another movement of those of us that understand and support education to counter that. And that, I think, is very serious. I'm very concerned about, especially because of my last job, recruiting teachers. We're struggling across the country. And even now in like Lexington 5, the equivalent would be Henrico County in Virginia now, where I live. They're having trouble finding teachers in even those communities. I never thought I'd live to see the day that there would be shortages in elementary education, elementary teachers, but there are.
Yeah.
And so, the opportunity is that I think those of us in education see that rallying cry and see that we're being attacked, and the learning loss that's so important that and it's going to take, not Band-Aid efforts, it's going to take major efforts to reverse that. So I think you can build support for it, but you've got to have everybody engaged, and you've got to have a leader that believes in education.
And you used the word movement
Yes,
earlier when
it's
you were
gotta
talking
be
about that. And so Ginger, as someone who's been an elected official, I'd love your perspective on the current political climate. Is it possible? And can people lead their leaders as opposed to the other way around?
One of the biggest problems I have in my job is I'm now back under the judicial code of conduct, so I may not be able to answer this question.
Fair enough.
I think that the answer, seriously, is to elect more people who care about the future of South Carolina and not their election, that they've got a job as a public servant to do. And I think that's going to take all of us getting together and go back to those town hall meetings and getting the general public involved in the election process and making sure that they're asking the questions that they need the answers to. Because I don't think that's happening now. And obviously with social media now, I mean, it's an entirely different program than I was subject to. When I ran, I had my only opponent had a doctorate in education, and he was telling everybody in Clinton that he had a doctorate in political science. Well, he wasn't from Clinton. I went to kindergarten with them, and he never really understood, very qualified person, never really understood how he lost. But it didn't have anything to do with his ability or whatever, but he was not from there. So I think we need to be more active in our elections and get people involved. And we can do it. We know how to do it. We've done it before. We can do it again.
Thank you. And Dwight, as a consummate political strategist, sort of the inspiration for House of Cards and all
Keep
those
talking.
things. Yeah. The practitioner of the dark arts, all of those things. If you were to take some of these lessons from this playbook and put them into practice today, how would you do that? What would that look like for you?
I don't know that I certainly don't have a single answer. I think that, first of all, you've got to start by, the way to solve any problem is to first recognize the problem, and along with that, recognize the breadth of the problem. And by that, I mean, the South Carolina Senate for the last 3 weeks has been debating a bill that provides money for underprivileged students to go to private schools. I don't have any particular problem with that, but if it does everything it's supposed to do to the max, it'll affect 15,000 students. What do we got, Terry?
800,000.
800,000 students. So if we could get our leaders somehow to quit majoring in the minor and look at the bigger picture, and I think there are a lot of lessons that can be applied from this, but the political process has changed so much now that it would require, for instance, you couldn't do what we did back then, now, for a lot of reasons, not the least of which, if you tried to replicate it now with the technology that's available, you'd need a large sum of money to start with, or you couldn't get to the to the start line. It's just a fact. Where would that come from? It would almost have to now come from the business community, who is beginning, I think, to recognize that if we don't continue to improve our schools, they will not have any employees. The world is changing so much, as Terry said. So I think we have to look to them as leaders, and I agree with Ginger. We need to elect better people who are more interested in the betterment of the state rather than just the next election. Well, let me say one other thing, John. I talked a lot about the House, and I see some people here specifically, Nick Theodore and Harry Chapman. And we did, after we got it past the House, Ginger, we did have to get it past the Senate. Yeah. We had a bit of an easier job there because people like Harry and Nick had been involved in the process of developing the bill as it came along. Harry was chairman of the Education Committee, and we had the leadership really supported us in the Senate, especially by the time we got there. It was a battle, but we got it done, so I wanted to be sure that you didn't understand that this bill only got halfway through the process.
I want to piggyback on something you said, Dwight, because this whole idea of, we're going to put some money in to allow parents to have school choice, for example, or send kids to private schools. I, in my heart of hearts, believe that that is intended to absolve us of the responsibility to educate all kids. And we should be constantly talking about all students, public education. And I got my award from President Reagan. And in my remarks that day, I used the term public education, I think 15 times, to stress, because I think he was on that bandwagon of school choice. And I have to say that Dick Riley was the first governor to go to that Teacher of the Year event of a different party of the president. And everybody thought that was astounding. And as a teacher, I'm thinking, why would that be astounding? Education is not political. It's for all of our kids. So I think pointing out what you said is that, okay, this is going to cost us, but it's only going to reach 15,000 students or whatever. What we've got to think about is all students, and the world is not standing still. You talked about, Terry, the states, we're all competing against each other. Well, we're not only competing against each state, but we're competing against the world. And having taught in Singapore, we're a country that has no natural resources, their investment in their children in education is what's made them a world leader. So, I've seen it firsthand from many different levels, and I think those are the kinds of things we have to constantly point out, that you're not solving the problem when you're just giving a little bit of money here and there to reach a few students. We've got to really tackle what we do for all of our kids.
John, I really think this idea of helping people understand how big it is in any state. By the way, South Carolina is about an average state now in student enrollment, 800,000. So you saw how the EIA had initiatives to kind of boost everybody. Well, if you wanted to raise the scores, you got to boost everybody. I mean, you can't just do a couple. A couple of things about the current COVID losses. I'm part of the After School Alliance. Mm-hmm. And we had a briefing the other day about politics of education beyond after school. And it pleasantly surprised us. There still is a big, solid, silent majority in the middle on education issues. It's just that it's hard to rally them because they don't want to get in these fights. And so you'd have to think of a new way, a new grassroots way to do what we did. Mm-hmm. Now, let me mention one little thing we stumbled into that was just incredible. Most times now, when you propose something new, you have a hearing around the state. 200 people show up, 20 speak, usually the ones who are most angry, vociferous. The other 180 sit there. They go away unmotivated. The EIA, we didn't do that. We took whoever showed up. In Florence, because of superintendents, including some of you, 3,000 people showed up. Now, how do you break 3,000 people into discussion groups? We did that. So then when you're sitting in a group of 15, 20 people, And your peers, and even though you're as mad as hell, it's hard to get as mad when you have to convince over here that your grade is just, your idea is brilliant. It almost forces consensus. So it was we stumbled into it, and it's one of the, probably the most important things to get consensus, get small groups representing a lot of sectors together. Now, I know there's some sectors that are kind of way out there, so you got to figure out how to deal with that. One final thing related to the recovery. A lot of work, as I said, I work now on after school and summers with some of my colleagues here. And in a recent poll we did of parents in every state, this might shock you, we got 85% or more of Republican parents, Democratic parents, and independent parents to agree, and after school and summers, you should have those opportunities to help young people engage with peers to reduce unproductive screen time, universal. Another one, use after school and summers to excite young people about learning and be interested in school. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that only to promote after school and summers, which is part of the solution, but it shows if you kind of approach these things in a different way, we might be surprised how much support we can get. But it takes a new way of building consensus, but we really need that now.
And I think that point of consensus, given how this all came about, is a great place for us to end.
Yeah.
So please join me in thanking our panelists. It's a story about leadership. And it's a story about how the masses can demonstrate leadership. There's a quote that's attributed to Gandhi, which he says, "There go my people, I must follow them, for I am their leader." And the passage of the EIA is a great example of that leadership in action. The individuals who were here, who were a part of both setting those conditions and then implementing the outcomes that we achieved in the legislature, are a part of that. But it all starts with the governor. And it's now my pleasure to welcome to the stage a person who likes to call himself, for Jeff and me especially, our professor, because he did teach us, but whom I think, quite honestly, is one of the most consequential public servants of our time. Governor Secretary Richard Riley.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, John. I finished my tour as governor, and I got a semester opportunity, fellowship at Harvard. So I was a professor up there for one semester. In my class was John Simpkins. And I was so happy to have a South Carolinian and person from Lexington County or whatever. And he and I have been great friends ever since. And I can say the same of Jeff Livingston, who's here. And we had an experience with Harvard also. And they were up there talking about what was happening in South Carolina. And it was really of interest to everybody. I had an email a little bit ago. Do you remember Margaret Bethea was my campaign manager the second time I ran? And she's now married to George McHenry. She had a stroke several months ago, a right serious stroke, especially on the left side. And she sent me an email and said that she would be with us in spirit, but that they couldn't come. But then she went on to say that she walked on a treadmill recently. So her left side was affected, but she's strong and she's working out of it. And y'all think about Margaret, if you would. She's going to be fine, but it's going to take a lot of hard work and time. I had so many experiences during all this period of time, and so interested in seeing. I didn't see Crosby, I didn't see Bill Prince. Anyhow, it's great to see all of you all. A lot of things happened that I remember. Some I try to forget. But I had an experience. My wife Tunky and I went into public schools, some 400 or 500 of them, over a period of 2 years during the EIA. I would go into the classroom, and a lot of times it was in elementary school, and they'd give me a little seat in the back, and of course, the seats are very small. And I'd have to wiggle into the seat. I would get the teacher to teach for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and I would pay good attention. Then I would ask to come up and make some remarks. This was a rural school, Terry, the kind of school you're talking about, and they had been left out altogether. Here the governor was there, and that was a big deal. And they were very excited to have me, and I was up talking to them, said the teacher's teaching addition, and I work in addition every single day as governor. Someday you all can be governor, perhaps, but please pay attention because what you're doing is important. Well, there was a little guy on the second row named Freddie. It was a first grade class. They had the name taped across their desk. So I looked down, he was jumping all around. The highway patrol were outside, lights blinking. The most action they'd had in that little area ever, I believe. So I said, I've got to get this guy's attention. He is absolutely into this highway patrol out here. So I said, Freddie, tell me, my office is in Columbia. Trying to get his attention, get him off of that. I said, you ever been to Columbia? He jumped up. He said, yeah, Governor. He said, my mother and father and I went to see the Gamecocks play a year or so ago. They got beat. Daddy got drunk, and we had to bring him straight home. Now, I don't know what you learn from those kind of things, but that's the real world. I would say this, in an outreach campaign, you do get into all kind of interesting experiences. I'm flattered and humbled by the group that's here today. And I thank you, everyone, people from Fritz, I know, from Utah and Washington State and all around. It means a lot to me that you took the effort, the interest, the love of education to make the effort to be here. And I thank you for that. As you know, I've been blessed with a long life. None of you are 90, I don't think. If you are, it's pretty old. Anyhow, I'm blessed even more to have had so many, many friends. And I mean real friends, people who I literally loved and who loved me. And that makes life so important. That has helped me in all of my activity, whatever it's been, all the way along the way. Friends, people that I loved and respected. I would say this, that once we get into the broad consensus and the hard work, and Terry Dozier mentioned the bottom third and so forth, and that's The EIA is all about everybody, all the children. And that was the whole idea of it. And that is so very important. But I use many of these hardworking folks, and I would like to acknowledge and applaud every one of you here who have the same feeling as I do, and I know that. First, Mike Daniels here, the Lieutenant Governor, who was on the picture when I was signing the EIA. The Smurfs, Ginger was one of them, and the press made a big deal out of that. The Smurfs back then were all small people. So they meant by that there was no committee chairman, there was nobody with any power. Ginger, you might have had some power, but not much. Anyhow, the Smurfs were, about 15 people, maybe 20, and they fought like tigers. I mean, they hung together and frankly did so much, Dwight, to get this thing passed. And I was very proud of all of them, and certainly Ginger was in the middle of it. And I also see lots of folks who are here who worked in my administration as governor. And I appreciate all of you. Of course, Dwight knows part of it, but many of you here really were part of my governor's staff, and I had the most wonderful staff in the world. Anything you do, you have to have strong support, strong people, and I had them. So let me ask anybody that was connected with me as governor in any way, please stand and let us give you a hand, because that was a very important group. Good. Thank you. Then we also have a lot of teachers here, other education leaders, school board members, family members, community, business leaders, other citizens who were so absolutely important in getting this people's movement passed. They were the ones that got it passed. All of the people who believed in what we were doing. I love Ted Lasso. Of course, he was a coach of football, but he ended up coaching soccer. But his main thing was believe. If you believe, you can go out and play soccer even though you're a football player. But anyhow, our people believed in what we were doing. And they didn't turn back, did they, Terry, ever? So anyhow, that was activists who are here. I don't care how you were active. You were part of the EIA. Maybe family gatherings, teaching children to read, helping your teacher out, supporting your teacher. Anyhow, those are the things that make me appreciate the activists who were involved. And that includes maybe everybody here. So raise your hands and let's give you a hand. People who were active. The education leaders then play a major role. Then I have people here who I'm so proud of, worked for me and with me when I was U.S. Secretary of Education. Surprised and grateful to see so many of them here, and people from the West Coast and people West Washington, Arizona. So I start calling names, I'll have to call everybody's name, but people who came long distances just to be in this meeting, just to talk about what we did all together. And they were part of it too. The U.S. Washington Department of Education. We had a softball team there, and we won from all the different departments. I remember we beat Treasury just barely. And our pitcher was a girl, a softball, fastball, and she was a Furman graduate. And she was a heck of a pitcher. So we won that game, and Summers, the treasurer, was there. That kind of playing together really makes a whole lot of difference. They called my team Riley's Rulers. Ruler. Anyhow, that's part of what we did up there that was fun. I don't know, my friend David Trone is strongly supporting the Riley Institute and everything we're about. Is he going to be spoken to today? He then has pledged $1 million to the Riley Institute. He is a Furman graduate, very successful, and what a loyal Furman person he is. He's done a lot more than that for Furman, but this, for the Riley Institute, $1 million, and that'll help us along the way. But I appreciate David Trone so much. Anyone else who has supported education improvement in any way by going to a PTA meeting or whatever would be included in that last group as activists who really support quality schools. Now the book, I really haven't had time to read the book. However, everybody who has tells me how wonderful it is, and what I've read is very, very good, and some grand pictures in there, whatever. But I'll tell you, the book, from everything I can gather, is just incredible. And a lot of people need credit for that. That makes so much difference. I'm so proud to have this documentation of the work of the thousands and thousands of individuals we've been talking about who were part of this people's movement. You're familiar with those two names? That says a lot. That's what it was all about. It was a people's movement, not just a small increase in money and whatever, but it was a movement. And that movement made a difference. And I think Terry and the rest of them really pointed out what a difference it has made. I want to thank Jackie Martin, Don Gordon, Terry Peterson, everybody at the Riley Institute for the role that they played. And a special appreciation to Kathy Cat Stevens. All right. She incredibly managed all of this. When you have a people's movement, it's not like you can call 2 or 3 people and get something going. It's everybody. And she handled all that beautifully, and I think we all need to thank her for that. And I'm grateful for the time and the effort of those who were interviewed in the book. Whoever was interviewed, raise your hand. I know a lot of you were. Yeah. That's what made up the book. And those of you that took the time, took the interest, and were interviewed, thank you so much for improving the book and making it really what it is. The UFC library was very good, providing information and other sources. All of those things came together. But let me conclude by thanking Bob Seffel. Bob, the least interviewer and author extraordinary of the book. He interviewed everybody. He interviewed it last, whatever it took. But he really brought it all together in such a wonderful, wonderful way. The last, he also laid out a game plan, and that was pointed out too for the future, for other states, for others to follow, because that game plan then moves it on into the future. The current and future generations on any issue and in any state, the same modus operandi that we use certainly could be moved there. The actions outlined in the book can be used at the local level, at the state level, anywhere in America. And as any winning team, the more plays you have out there, the better is the game. I'm delighted to welcome Bob up here to tell us a little more about the writing of this wonderful book, and let's give him a great hand for the wonderful job he did.
Thank you, Governor. What an honor it indeed has been to be a part of the team working on this important project of the Riley Institute. And Governor, I've long been inspired by your values and your lifetime of commitment to public service. Friends, 40 years ago, in 1983, I was working as a history and American government teacher in Marion County. And as a 25-year-old native South Carolinian with a passion for our state's history and politics, I am from Barnwell after all, I watched with absolute fascination and amazement the genesis and flowering of an unprecedented statewide campaign, a people's movement led by Governor Riley to transform public education all across our state. The governor and his team, at the very outset, pulled out all the stops to engage grassroots citizens in every corner of the state, along with local and state leaders, in a full-on public conversation about what we wanted our public schools to be and to do, and what it would take to get us there. Now, as Kathy noted, I attended the Florence Regional EIA Forum in the fall of 1983, along with a busload of teachers and parents and farmers and business people and school board members from the Britain's Neck community. We literally rode together on the high school activity bus over to Florence. And along with thousands of others who attended one of 7 such forums across the state that fall, we shared our ideas with the governor's team about how to improve educational outcomes for all children, how we could better support teachers and principals and elevate the teaching profession, how we could work together as partners in our communities across sectors, sharing responsibility for strengthening our schools in order to build a stronger future for our state. Each of us also shared what we were willing to do when called upon to advocate for those improvements. Then, in the winter and the spring of 1984, I continued to watch with fascination as the EIA proposal moved through the General Assembly. Now, it was deftly navigated inside the legislature by a group of incredibly smart and politically savvy floor leaders, supported, of course, by Terry Peterson and others on the governor's leadership team. But notably, the work going on inside the State House was powered from the outside by this extraordinary outpouring of statewide grassroots advocacy involving, as you've heard, classroom teachers and administrators, school boards, PTAs, chambers of commerce, members of the faith community, and others. Those of us in schools and in district offices began planning that spring for possible implementation, in addition to reaching out to our local representatives and senators. And then, after the EIA was signed into law in late June of 1984, until I left South Carolina in 1989 to attend graduate school, my primary responsibility was to support the successful implementation of the EIA in Marion District 4. So, from the very outset of my career, Governor, in public education, the EIA has exerted a profound influence on me and on what became my life's work. And now, on the back end of my career, 40 years later, I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to revisit the EIA with so many of you, those who led or were involved in the effort in some way. I'd certainly like to take a moment to extend my thanks to all those whose support made the book possible and the experience of writing it so deeply satisfying and frankly genuinely fun. There are way too many to name from the podium right now, so please take a look at the acknowledgement section in the playbook. But I would like to call out for special thanks my wife Marcia, my colleague Ron Fairchild, Kathy, and my other friends and colleagues at the Riley Institute, and Lord, our interviewees. I was so honored to have the opportunity to spend the time with you talking about your memories of this experience. I really hope that the book conveys a semblance of that sense of excitement, confidence, intense dedication, belief, Governor, and possibility that we felt 40 years ago, sentiments that were expressed again so very strongly by our oral history interviewees. Further, our team hopes that the playbook will inform and inspire a new generation of leaders and advocates for excellence and equity in public education. Governor, of course, your legacy didn't end with the EIA or even with your subsequent service during your years in D.C. There's even now, today, a very engaged, dedicated group of individuals here at the Riley Institute who work day in and day out to bring people together to address our state's core challenges. So I'd like now to invite to the podium the Executive Director of the Richard W. Riley Institute, Dr. Don Gordon, to share a little bit more about the Institute's work. Thank you.
I love being here with Dick's extended family. Truly are. And Dick, I think also that Freddie would be a part of it too. I understand after you talked to him there at that school district, he later on came to Furman under a scholarship and as a teacher at R.B. Stall High School. And yeah, I think that's it. I think you all know that Dick Riley has been the education governor of South Carolina. But as Bill Clinton said, he's been America's education governor. I think you know that Time Magazine said he was one of the 10 best cabinet members of all time. But I think we know, all of us know deep inside, he is the best cabinet member that this nation has ever had, Dick Riley. And the reason why is he's been so innovative and so effective in what he has done. He remains an inspiration to everybody that knows him, and especially all of us in the Riley Institute. You've heard today in remarkable ways about how he worked to pass this landmark legislation, the EIA. We know that he worked as Secretary of Education to champion quality public education for all of America's children through these exciting, innovative initiatives that were related to family success, to after-school and summer learning, and the arts and education. After decades of service, many of us might think that we would just rest on our laurels and retire, but not Dick Riley. His efforts have continued in so many ways, through his work on the Board of Ed Council, on Furman's Board of Trustees, on the boards of so many educational organizations across this country and internationally. What I'd really like to tell you about is that his legacy lives on in this Riley Institute. When Secretary Riley and David Shai and I launched the Riley Institute in 1999, we did so with the shared belief that public education and building leadership among diverse peoples were key to progress in South Carolina. So let's talk first about diversity. We know that during his administration, Dick Riley recruited a diverse staff because he knew, long before other politicians, that a diverse group of people working together brings the best solutions. They always bring the best solutions to the problems we face. The Riley Institute has a focus on bringing together diverse leaders to help create inclusive social and economic progress across South Carolina. And we do that through our flagship program, DLI, Diversity Leaders Initiative. It's unique in the country. DLI has graduated over 2,700 leaders across the state of South Carolina. Many of you in here are graduates of this program. They come from large corporations, from nonprofit organizations, from law enforcement, from faith and value-based organizations, and from the creative world. Leaders who actually reflect South Carolina's demographics. And the collective impact of the over 350 civic action programs that these leaders have carried out across the state of South Carolina is simply amazing. And on the public education front, as we all know, that's where Dick's heart lies. And so the Riley Institute, his institute, has always sought to support public education and advance initiatives supporting public education that prove successful. Central to our work, as was always the case with Dick Riley, is collaboration and partnerships with organizations who are doing the work on the ground, as well as with the State Department of Education, to create opportunities for students to catch up, to keep up, and to get ahead. So here are a few highlights of our work. First, supporting public education through research. We know that utilizing evidence-based solutions is absolutely key to successful outcomes. So a big part of what we do in this institute is research. The Riley Institute has led the largest research study ever done on public education in South Carolina. And under the leadership of our research director, Dr. Brooke Holklaesher, the Riley Institute has become a national leader and evaluator of the innovative Montessori approach to education. Secondly, leadership development to support after-school and summer learning in public school teachers. Our annual White Riley Peterson Fellowship Program, funded by the Mott Foundation, with graduates from all 50 states, builds capacity among leaders to be public policy changers, change makers for the benefit of after-school and expanded learning. Our SCALE program, the South Carolina After School Leaders Empowerment, works with after-school and summer learning leaders across the state to maintain and grow high-quality evidence-based programs in South Carolina. Our annual Teachers of Government program, which Sandy Rink is a huge part of, a week-long intensive learning opportunity in DC for middle and high school teachers of social science. Teachers who will bring back real-world experience to their classrooms. And then additional supports for public education. The annual What Works South Carolina Awards and Clearinghouse illuminates and celebrates highly successful, data-based, innovative education programs in South Carolina. Project-based learning has been expanded in South Carolina as we have worked with KnowledgeWorks Foundation and later the New Tech Network to bring highly successful New Tech schools to underserved children across the state. Behind all of this work, behind all of these efforts, is the amazing presence of Dick Riley. His integrity as a leader, his ability to bring people together to solve complex issues is why we affectionately call him our Chief Inspiration Officer. In everything we do, Secretary, we at the Riley Institute seek to build on your principles of excellence. We're absolutely honored to be part of an institute that bears your name and continues your work. Thank you for continuing to inspire us every day.